across our operating systems and devices is that wherever it can be applied, the data is never decrypted. You don't need to be concerned with consent. In fact, you get control over whomever it is that gets consent. So I think that if we're still having a conversation about like what RSA and elliptical curve encryption, et cetera, are doing, we're having this discussion about what does a given company need to know about me, when right now today, they don't need to know anything to give you the same customized Oculus Home or the same customized homepage. That hasn't needed to happen for years. It feels as if they understand that they either don't want to implement it for expense or they understand what it would actually do to their business model, and there's incentive not to. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan, and I appreciate your comments about homomorphic encryption. But I think there's a lot of other challenges here, and one of them is we're calling upon with a statement today on governments and companies to take better practice, encryption being part of that. But I think there's a lot of work to do to get companies and developers to incorporate encryption strongly in the project, even just any kind of end-to-end encryption. And I appreciate the efforts of differential privacy and homomorphic encryption to try to solve for some of these problems. But I think there's a lot of work to do as you suggest, to have a rule that everyone has to do it. That's a lot of work would have to be done to get that rule out there.
Yeah, I have two quick comments.
Next, go ahead, Ken.
Oh, yeah. So I think Lawrence Lessig's approach of saying that there's different layers of which that you're addressing these different issues, starting with like the earth, and then the cultural context, and then from there you have the legal context and the economic context, and then eventually you get to the technological architecture and the code. And these ethical issues cannot be solved through pure technological determinism, meaning that you can just find a technological fix to sort of solve everything. It has to have different layers of both the law and other aspects of please click the megaphone. Okay. I'm not having a megaphone that's showing up. So, so anyway, sorry, I got distracted. So there's the big thing that I'd say is context and what the contextual use of information, and Nissenbaum's contextual integrity, which I was appreciating what Vera was saying earlier. Okay. Oops, how about that? Confirm. Can you hear me now?
We got you.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know where I got cut off, so I'll just go back to the part where you can't technologically have technological determinism, meaning that you have just a pure technological solution to some of these issues. There's always going to be contextual dimensions, and there's always going to be other realms in which that you may need to have law. I think the big thing in Nissenbaum's contextual integrity is trying to find what appropriate flow is. And because these are new contextual domains, there's no existing normative standards for what is expected for what is required and what isn't required. But also the norms around all this psychographic profiling, the work from Britton Heller and biometric psychography. I'd also point to Raphael Yusta and the Morningstar Group's overarching human rights approach to neurodata called the NeuroRights Initiative. They have 5 fundamental neurorights. I think 3 are really crucial, but I'll say all 5 briefly. One is the right to identity, which means that you are trying to preserve the autonomy that you have control over who is recording all this information and trying to profile you and model your identity. And then from there, the right to mental privacy, meaning that there's going to be things in which that this technology is going to be able to read our thoughts and our emotions and create a fusion of all this information. And so we have a right to, maintain our autonomy over our mental privacy. And then the right to agency is after they've modeled us to the point where they start to try to nudge our behaviors, then we have the right to prevent in a world where we're constantly trying to be nudged and undermining our right to agency. And then the other 2 are the right to fair and equitable access to technology, and also to be free from algorithmic bias, which I think are general ethical issues and not so much, they are certainly relevant to the neurodata, but I think the identity, agency, and mental privacy are the ones that I am, the most concerned of in terms of the implications of the XR technologies. And I think that's where we need a lot of either intervention from establishing these as a human right, these neuro rights as a human right, and then from there, whether or not those human rights are then fed into our laws, especially regional laws, are going to be binding for a lot of these companies to perhaps put some constraints in terms of the degree to which that they can undermine our rights to identity, rights to agency, and rights to mental privacy. So in terms of human rights approaches to privacy, those are the things that are on my radar. There's a lot of open questions for how that actually plays out, but I just wanted to kind of throw out some of those ideas in that there's a group of neuroscientists that are out there creating a generalized framework for how to translate these neuro rights into different governance frameworks. And that was released in September. And at my talk that I gave at AWE, I gave a little bit of a overview of that. And I previously gave a whole talk on sort of the state of privacy, and I'll send those out as a tweet to kind of link to those two talks I gave if you want more information on any of that.
I think this really got us exactly into the stage of the discussion that we wanted to get to now, which was the solutions and pathways. And I think from Dylan and Kent, we just heard a really great overview of, two absolutely necessary components of that. One is a technical component, and we heard some really interesting stuff on how we could use homomorphic encryption. And then from Kent also on, the regulatory approach and also some of these emerging discussions around possibility of new human rights. I will say that, yeah, so I definitely agree that the right to be free from algorithmic bias is probably not the best framed one, given that the whole discussion around AI ethics and bias has been quite critical of the bias framing, as not really capturing the essence of how algorithms, AI can actually oppress people. But even on mental privacy, I think, I don't know if anyone like some of the Katitza or Gaspar or someone wants to jump in. I think from perspective of people who are working on with existing data protection legislation, privacy legislation, it seems maybe could adapt the existing rights that we have, the right to privacy, and use data protection regulation to actually achieve the things that we want from this right to mental privacy, which in itself could be great, maybe if it already existed. But and Kent, you had a great bit on this in one of your podcasts about the extremely complex process that we would have to go through to get it, accepted as a right, to get it into something workable. So I'm just wondering if anyone has thoughts on, what's been brought up so far, how existing regulations could work. Katitza?
Yeah, I think I would like to maybe ask a question that create a little of like tension here. um, some developers are really passionate with the idea of being able to have some freedom to experiment, some without harming the people, but play with emotional reactions or be able to do certain things on XR. And sometimes that will require some of your data, your mental data. Some others, we are concerned about the use of this data, of our the data that will reveal our emotional vulnerabilities that later can be used to target us with certain type of advertisement. Um, how we do draw the line and I want to hear from people like Andrea, who have been thinking a lot. She's a developer and a designer. I think Andrea, are you here?
Yes. Can you hear me? All right, perfect. Yeah, I want to add something to that and also connect it to the discussions about data and the algorithms. Okay, amplify. So I think I'm having a similar problem like Kent. I'm not seeing the amplify, the megaphone
I think
that
only
I
the hosts have the ability to self-amplify, so one of the hosts has to amplify the speaker.
All right, then someone could do that for me.
From XRSI, Christina, maybe you can help us?
So
Christina doesn't appear to be here.
she's not here. Um, two sides to the discussion of data. So on one hand, there's what we've been discussing, which is this new technology is definitely allowing us to know deeper things about ourselves, and then it just talk about the algorithms and how we interpret that data and the snake oil. But that has a big assumption. That assumes that we do not change and we are the same kind of people doing the same kind of things as in physical reality. And in the metaverse, in every world that we're in, we are the same kind of entity. I want to read to you the title of an article that came out a few days ago, December 3rd, in the Journal of Neuroscience. This is the title: Feeling of ownership over an avatar's hand brings about fast changes of frontal parietal cortical dynamics. So I'm not going to go into like exactly what that means, but basically starting to gather different kind of data about how our brains change when we are in this environment. So our visual cortex is communicating with the motor cortex in a very, very different way. So this is not are going to interpret things. This is about scientists trying to figure out how the way we function at a very deep cognitive level is different in VR. And then going back to what Katica was saying, there are developers like myself that are very interested in pushing those boundaries and exploring that. So I don't have an interest in creating VR experience where we are embodying like homomorphic things like here. I want to help people transform into other things. That transformation, we know now, like in this article that just came out a few days ago, implies transformations at a neural level. And I think that needs to be discussed more. We need to start by acknowledging that we don't have any idea what that means. We've never had a kind of technology that would do this to us in our living rooms. So how do we even tackle that? And so this is a completely different chapter than using algorithms to interpret the data. This is finding out how this is transforming us into different kind of humans, and what does that mean? So we said how we were talking earlier about how it's difficult to communicate to people how this data might be used against them or to their advantage. Well, imagine how hard it is to communicate to people the fact that their brains are changing when they're using VR. And we don't even know how that could be used in either good or bad ways right now. But I do think there's a need for discussion, and developer like myself, of course, need help figuring out, well, how far do we go? How do we communicate to people these things? So, and it's also about, okay, I'm offering people these possibilities to transform themselves, and I'm trying to explain the best I can what that means so they can make a good decision. Do I want to experience this or not? But there's an extent to which I don't fully understand what's going on with them. Lisa and I were talking earlier also about the need to teach people. So we are dealing with the need to educate people at a level that we've never faced before. So there's one, educate people about literacy about privacy and the danger of sharing your data. Great. How do we talk to people about literacy that their brains are being transformed by this technology? And that things that they might enjoy, like flying in VR or being a space octopus or God knows what else we're going to come up with, has this level of impact.
Maybe you can explain a little bit about flying on VR. Why you brought that example? I think that you were giving me some examples in our call, and maybe you can share a little bit about that. The risk of flying,
Yeah.
or why it's awesome to fly. I want to fly too.
So data, just like the article that I quoted from a few days ago, there's very fresh data coming in, proving that whenever we are doing things that drastically depart from what we would do in physical reality and in our humanoid bodies that have a certain mode of locomotion, there's data coming in that says there's this big changes happening in the brain when we do like completely, let's say, call them crazy things. When we have the feeling that, oh, this is, it's exactly this thing that make VR amazing. We have the feeling, oh, I can fly in VR. That just feels so new and so wonderful. Well, that observation, it feels so new, that implies the neural level. And we're starting to get data on that kind of change. So we need to